Story 1. The Man Who Never Knocked. The house seemed perfect when I first moved in. It sat on a quiet street lined with identical two-story homes, each with neat lawns and hedges trimmed so evenly they looked cloned. When I signed the papers, the realtor assured me, "Nothing bad ever happens here." That sentence would haunt me. I was 29, fresh out of a long-term relationship and ready to start over. My job allowed me to work remotely, so I spent my first weeks furnishing the place, adding my own touches and enjoying the peace. One thing I particularly liked was the doorbell camera system. The previous owner had installed a high-end model complete with night vision, motion detection, and a microphone. I barely used it at first, except to laugh at the occasional cat or delivery driver. Then came November 3rd. It was a Tuesday, cold enough that the windows fogged up at night. Around 3:15 a.m., my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I groaned, thinking it was a stray animal. Half asleep, I opened the app. At first, the image looked empty. Then I saw it. A man was standing at the edge of my porch light's glow. Tall, unnervingly thin, wearing a black hoodie with the hood pulled tight. His head was tilted up toward the camera. He didn't move. Didn't speak, just stared. At first, I thought it was some drunk or a lost neighbor. I waited, expecting him to knock or call out. He didn't. Minutes passed, and he didn't so much as twitch. A feeling like ice spread through my chest. My fingers trembled as I dialed 999. The dispatcher's calm voice asked questions I barely answered. Is he trying to break in? No. Is he armed? I couldn't tell. Stay inside, lock your doors. An officer is on the way. I stayed glued to the feed, watching as the figure remained motionless. 10 minutes felt like an hour. Then, just as flashing lights appeared at the end of my street, the man turned his head not toward the police, but directly at the camera. The movement was so slow, it was almost unnatural. His gaze locked on the lens, and somehow, I felt it pierce straight into me. Then, without a word, he stepped backward into the shadows and vanished. By the time the police arrived, the porch was empty. They searched the street, but found nothing. They suggested it was probably a prank. I wanted to believe them. But I couldn't shake the image of those eyes staring into the camera staring at me. The next night I went to bed earlier, but I couldn't sleep. I left the lights on and kept my phone by my pillow. At 3:12 a new alert went off again. My heart pounded as I opened the feed. This time, he was closer, standing on the bottom step, his head tilted, face just barely visible under the hoodie. He stood there, breathing heavily. The microphone picked it up, the sound raspy and slow. I watched frozen as his lips moved slightly. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but then I heard it soft, almost drowned out by static. Daniel ... my name. My stomach dropped. No one in this neighborhood knew me. I had never spoken to him. I whispered into the empty room, "Who are you?" Even though he couldn't hear me. As if in answer, he tilted his head further, almost unnaturally, like his neck would snap. Then he turned slowly and walked away, disappearing into the darkness once again. The police came, less enthusiastic this time, and suggested I was being targeted by someone I knew. They asked me to make a list of anyone who might hold a grudge. The problem was, I couldn't think of anyone. I didn't go into work the next day. In fact, I barely moved from the couch, staring at my phone, waiting for another alert. My curtains stayed shut, lights dimmed. Every little sound outside, garbage truck, a dog barking, a neighbor's car door, made me jolt like a frightened animal. Around noon, I got a knock on the door. My stomach lurched, but it was only Officer Graham, the same cop from the night before. He was older, calm, the kind of officer you'd expect in a small town where nothing happens. "You're sure you don't know him?" he asked while reviewing the footage I'd saved. "Positive. I've never seen him before in my life." He squinted at the screen, replaying the moment where the man whispered my name. The audio was faint, but the words were undeniable. "That's creepy as hell," he muttered. "We'll increase patrols tonight. Keep your doors locked." I nodded, but deep down, I knew patrols wouldn't help. This wasn't some random prankster. This felt personal. That evening, I called my mom. She lives hours away, but she's always been protective. I told her about the man, the whispers, the way he knew my name. There was a long pause before she said softly, "Daniel, are you sure it's not someone from your childhood? What do you mean? You were sensitive as a kid. You used to have these nightmares, remember? Especially after that camp you went to. You'd wake up screaming about someone watching you. Maybe this is triggering something." I wanted to dismiss it, but her words stuck with me like splinters. I hadn't thought about that camp in years. As the sun set, my anxiety spiked. I tried to distract myself with TV, but every laugh track felt hollow. At 2:55 a.m., I turned off the lights and sat by the window, watching the street. 3:09 a.m. alert buzzed. My hands shook as I opened the feed. The man was back, closer, standing at the top step, just inches from the door. The camera caught his face better now, pale skin stretched too tight over sharp cheekbones, lips curling into a slight smile. His eyes were hollow but intense, as if they could burn through the screen. I didn't move. I barely breathed. For several minutes, he stood there, breathing heavily into the mic. Then, so faintly I almost missed it, he whispered, "You remember me, don't you?" A chill ran through my spine. The voice was raspy, almost broken, but something about it felt familiar. I whispered to myself, "No, I don't." As if he heard me, his grin widened. Slowly, he raised his hand and pointed at the camera. Then, dragging his finger across his throat, he made a slicing gesture. The feed flickered. For a moment, his face distorted on screen, mouth stretching unnaturally, eyes blacker than night, then everything went black. I jumped up, gripping the baseball bat so hard my knuckles turned white. My heart hammered as I waited, listening for the sound of the door opening, of footsteps. But the house remained silent. When I checked the feed again, it was back online, but the man was gone. The next morning, I reviewed the footage. The last 10 seconds were missing, replaced by static. That's when the nightmares started. That night, I dreamt I was 10 again, standing in the woods at camp. The trees loomed impossibly tall, their branches like skeletal fingers against the moonlight. Someone stood behind me, whispering my name. I turned, and there he was, the same man, only younger, in a camp counselor's uniform. "You promised," he hissed. His smile widened until it split his face. I woke up screaming. By the fourth night, I was a wreck. I considered leaving, staying at a hotel, but something inside me whispered that it wouldn't matter. He would find me. That night I stayed up again, live feed open, bat in hand. 3:07 a.m., the alert buzzed. I opened the feed, and this time he wasn't at the porch. He was standing at the far end of the driveway, barely visible. The camera barely caught his outline, but he was there, swaying slightly, whispering something I couldn't make out. Then, step by step, he began walking toward the house. Slow, deliberate, savoring each movement. When he reached the middle of the driveway, he crouched down and placed something on the ground. Then he straightened, turned his head toward the camera, and with a sickeningly slow wave, disappeared back into the shadows. I didn't open the door until sunrise. On the driveway, I found a photograph, old, faded, edges torn. It was me, around 10 years old, standing with other kids at camp. Behind us was a tall man in a counselor's uniform. His face was blurred, but the shape, the posture was unmistakable. On the back, in smeared ink, were the words, "You forgot me. I didn't forget you." My hands trembled as I clutched the photo. I didn't know what terrified me more, the fact that he knew my past, or the fact that a part of me was starting to remember. The photo stayed in my hand for hours like a cursed object I couldn't put down. Every time I tried to set it aside, my eyes would be drawn back to the blurred figure behind me. It was like he was looking straight at me, even through the distortion. I called my mother again that afternoon, my voice shaking. "Mom, who was the camp counselor that year? The tall one?" She hesitated. "Daniel, why are you digging this up now? Please just tell me." After a long pause, she said, "His name was Eli. The camp closed a year after you left. They said he disappeared, just vanished one night. Nobody ever found him." My mouth went dry. "What do you remember about him?" "He was strange," she admitted. "Too attached to the kids, especially you. He'd ask to take you on hikes alone. When you came home, you wouldn't talk for days. You just kept saying, 'He's coming.'" I hung up without saying goodbye. My hands were trembling so badly I nearly dropped the phone. That night I double-checked every lock in the house, front door, back door, windows. I even barricaded the doors with chairs. Then I sat on the couch with the bat and waited. The hours crawled by. 3:05 a.m. The alert buzzed. I opened the feed and my heart almost stopped. He wasn't on the porch. He wasn't in the driveway. He was standing under the streetlight at the end of the road, far away but perfectly still, his silhouette elongated by the dim glow. For nearly 5 minutes, he didn't move. Then, slowly, he stepped backward into the darkness until he vanished completely. I exhaled shakily, thinking maybe that was it. Maybe he was gone for the night. Then my phone buzzed again. The feed changed, not to the porch, not to the street, but to the backyard. My camera wasn't even supposed to face that way, yet there he was, standing in the shadows, just barely visible. My blood turned to ice. He was inside the fence. He moved closer to the lens, and for a split second, the feed glitched, showing his face distorted, mouth stretching unnaturally, teeth sharp like broken glass. When the picture cleared, he was gone. I stayed awake till dawn, clutching the bat so tightly my hands ached. The police came again later that day. Officer Graham looked at me with pity, but also suspicion. "You sure you're not seeing things?" he asked carefully. "You think I'm making this up?" I snapped, shoving the footage at him. He watched, frowning. "This part's corrupted." "Look, Daniel, there's no evidence of forced entry. Maybe it's just a glitch. Maybe stress is. Stress doesn't leave photographs in my driveway." I yelled. He sighed. "We'll patrol again tonight. But if nothing happens, maybe you should talk to someone. A therapist, maybe." I wanted to argue, but deep down I knew he didn't believe me. Nobody would. The 5th night I didn't sit on the couch. I barricaded myself in my bedroom, phone in hand, waiting for the inevitable. 3:08 a.m. The alert buzzed. I opened the feed and my stomach lurched. He was on the porch, closer than ever, his face fully visible now. His skin looked gray, his eyes sunken, and his smile stretched unnaturally wide. He stood perfectly still, except for his head, which tilted back and forth slowly, like a broken doll. "You left me there," he whispered. The microphone captured it perfectly, the words raspy and full of venom. I whispered back to the screen, "What do you want from me?" His grin widened until it nearly split his face. Then he leaned closer, lips almost touching the camera, and hissed, "Let me in." The feed flickered, distorting his face into something inhuman. For a moment, I swore I saw teeth too sharp to be human, eyes black as voids. Then the screen went black. The front door handle rattled violently. I bolted upright, gripping the bat. The rattling turned into pounding hard, deliberate bangs that shook the door. My heart slammed against my ribs. Then, suddenly, silence. I crept to the door, every muscle tense. Peeking through the peephole, I saw nothing. No one. But then, from the other side of the door, a voice sang softly, almost like a lullaby. "Danny boy. Danny boy." The sound crawled into my ears, into my brain, freezing me in place. I backed away slowly, bat raised, but the voice followed me, growing louder, harsher, until it cut off abruptly. The rest of the night passed in silence, but I didn't sleep. I couldn't. When the sun rose, I reviewed the footage. Most of it was static. But at the very end, There was one frame, just one of me asleep on the couch. And in the corner of the room, barely visible, stood Eli. The door had never opened. The day after the frame of Eli standing in my living room appeared, I couldn't think straight. I barely ate, barely moved, pacing the house like a trapped animal. Every reflective surface, every shadowed corner, I swore I saw movement. I called Officer Graham again, begged him to send someone that night. His tone was sharp now, almost annoyed. "Daniel, we've done 3 patrols and found nothing. If someone's harassing you, set up more cameras. If you feel unsafe, stay with a friend." But I had no friends nearby, and deep down, I knew running wouldn't help. Eli wasn't human anymore. As night fell, dread settled into my bones. The house felt heavier, like the air itself was pressing against me. I checked every lock twice, shoved furniture against the doors, and even duct taped the windows shut. It felt pathetic, like building sandcastles against a tidal wave. I sat on the floor of my bedroom, bat in one hand, phone in the other. The live feed glowed, casting a cold light across my face. I counted down the minutes. 3 and nothing. 3:04 My heart pounded, sweat dripping down my temples. 3:06 Silence stretched so long I almost believed he wouldn't come. Then 3:07 As my screen lit up and I froze. The camera wasn't showing the porch. It wasn't even showing the yard. It was showing the hallway inside my house. I didn't have a camera there. Yet the feed was clear, grainy black and white, but clear. Eli was standing in the hallway, motionless, head tilted, staring directly into the lens. "You let me in," he whispered. His voice came not from the phone, but from everywhere, filling the room, vibrating in my bones. I scrambled to my feet, backing against the wall, clutching the bat like it was my last lifeline. My phone slipped from my hand, clattering to the floor. The screen flickered, footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming up the stairs. The air grew icy cold. My breath came out in white puffs, even though the heater was on. The sound of each step creaked louder than it should, as if the house itself was warning me. I pressed my back against the wall, staring at the door. The handle turned slowly, click, 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 but the barricade I'd built held. Then silence. My chest tightened. Maybe he'd stopped. Maybe, a whisper, directly behind me. "You shouldn't have left me." I spun around, swinging the bat wildly, but there was nothing there. The room was empty, yet the smell of damp earth and decay filled the air. My skin prickled with goosebumps. The phone on the floor buzzed again, screen flickering back to life. I crawled toward it, shaking, and when I picked it up, my blood froze. The feed was showing me, sitting in the corner of my room, holding the phone. The angle was wrong, like the camera was floating just behind me. And in the feed, standing directly behind me, was Eli. His smile was impossibly wide, his eyes pits of darkness. I spun around, swinging the bat, but this time my arm froze mid-swing. Something cold and invisible gripped my wrist, my throat. The bat clattered to the floor. Eli stepped into view, no longer on the screen, but in the room with me. His body flickered like bad reception, shifting between the camp counselor I remembered and the pale, hollow creature from the porch. "You promised you'd stay with me forever," he hissed, his voice echoing in my skull. I didn't. My voice cracked, tears streaming down my face. "You left me to rot there. You left me in the dark." Images flooded my mind, me running through the woods at camp, Eli calling my name, the moonlight flashing off something sharp in his hand. My younger self tripped, scrambled up, and ran, leaving him behind. Then darkness swallowed him. "You forgot me," he growled, his face twisting into something monstrous. "But I didn't forget you." The lights in the room exploded, plunging everything into blackness. I screamed, groping for the door, but icy hands grabbed me, pulling me back. The last thing I saw was his face inches from mine, mouth opening far too wide, a black void swallowing everything. The world went silent. When the sun rose, my house stood quiet and empty. The front door hung wide open, swinging gently in the morning breeze. The police found my phone smashed on the floor, the last recorded footage frozen on one frame. Sitting in the corner, wide-eyed with terror, as a shadow loomed behind me. They searched the house, the yard, the street. They searched the woods near the old camp. They found nothing. No one has seen me since. But neighbors whisper that at 3 a.m., their cameras sometimes catch a man in a black hoodie wandering the street, motionless under the streetlights. Sometimes, if you watch closely, you'll see another figure just behind him, smaller, with hollow eyes, following wherever he goes. And if you ever hear a whisper outside your door calling your name, whatever you do, don't open it. Story 2. The Smiling Woman. It was a rainy Thursday night when Sam, a 31-year-old IT consultant, decided to stay up late watching movies in his small London flat. His street was usually quiet, with the occasional late-night dog walker or passing car. But that night felt different, like the city itself was holding its breath. The rain tapped gently against the windows as he dozed on the couch. Just as his eyes were closing, his phone buzzed. 3:02 a.m. Nation detected. Front door camera. Half asleep, Sam groaned, assuming it was just the wind or maybe a stray cat. Still, he opened the app to check. The feed showed a woman standing at the edge of the porch light's glow. She wore a soaked white dress that clung to her body, her long black hair dripping rainwater down her face. She was smiling. Not the kind of smile you give a stranger, or even a friend. This was wide, unnatural, stretching far too much, as if her mouth had been carved into a grin. Sam sat up, heart pounding. What the hell? The woman didn't move. She didn't knock. She just stood there, her head slightly tilted, that eerie smile frozen in place. After a minute of silence, he turned up the camera's microphone sensitivity. Through the rain, he heard something faint, soft giggling, like a child's laugh, but wrong, distorted. He whispered to himself, "Who are you?" As if she heard him, the woman's head snapped up, eyes locking directly onto the lens. The giggling stopped. For a moment, her smile faltered, twisting into something else. Anger, hunger, something inhuman. Sam's stomach churned. He reached for his phone to call the police, but before he could dial, the feed flickered. When it cleared, she was gone. He stayed awake until dawn, every light in the house on, the bat he kept for emergencies clutched in his hand. The next morning, he checked the footage. The last 30 seconds were missing, replaced by static. The following night, Sam tried to convince himself it was a hallucination, maybe brought on by lack of sleep. But deep down, he knew she would be back. He tried to stay calm, but every sound outside made him jump. The rain came again, just like the night before, as if the weather itself was part of her arrival. 3 a.m. alert. 3:05 a.m. Still nothing. 3:10 a.m. Just as he started to breathe easier, the alert buzzed. This time, she was closer. Standing at the bottom step, rain pouring down her face, her smile even wider than before. Sam spoke into the mic, his voice trembling. "What do you want?" The woman tilted her head back and let out a laugh, a distorted, broken sound that made his blood run cold. Then she whispered, her voice soft yet somehow echoing in his ears. "Let me in, Sam." His heart nearly stopped. How did she know his name? He stumbled backward, dropping the phone. When he picked it up again, the feed showed only static. He didn't sleep that night. The third night, Sam installed 2 more cameras, one facing the street, the other the backyard. He wasn't taking chances. At 3:03, all 3 cameras lit up at once. The woman was not alone this time. The street camera caught her standing under the lamppost, but there were shapes, tall, thin figures, lurking just beyond the light, their faces hidden. On the porch camera, she stood perfectly still, but her grin had grown impossibly wide, stretching from ear to ear, revealing sharp teeth that hadn't been there before. On the backyard camera, Something moved, a shadow darting across the yard, too fast to follow. Sam's breathing turned ragged. He tried calling the police, but his phone wouldn't connect. The feed began to glitch, her face distorting, eyes black as voids, mouth stretching until it filled the screen. Then, clear as day, her voice came through the speakers. "You're smiling now too, Sam. I can see it." He reached for his face instinctively and realized his lips were curling into a grin he couldn't control. The screen went black. I'd been walking for about 15 minutes when I passed the old post office. It had been boarded up for years, but tonight the board seemed darker than usual, as though the building was swallowing the moonlight. That's when I noticed him, a boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old, standing perfectly still on the opposite side of the lane. He wasn't dressed for the weather. Thin shirt, no coat, no hat. His head was slightly tilted down, so I couldn't quite see his face. My first instinct was to call out to him, ask if he was lost. But something about the way he stood made the words catch in my throat. I told myself it was just the cold making me hesitate. I crossed the street slowly, my boots crunching in the frost. "Are you all right?" I asked. No answer. He didn't even flinch. Then, without lifting his head, he took one small step backward into the shadows between 2 cottages. It wasn't a natural kind of step. It was too smooth, too quiet. I quickened my pace, turning the corner where he'd gone. But the alley was empty. The only sound was my own breath, fogging the air. The boy was gone, as if he'd never been there at all. And yet, I could swear I heard the faintest whisper, drifting from deeper in the alley. "Go home." I tried to convince myself it was nothing more than an oddly shaped fence post. My brain was desperate to attach the shape to something ordinary. But the way it swayed slow, almost deliberate, made my skin tighten. I kept walking, my trainers squelching in the mud. I told myself that if I just kept moving, the fog would thin and the lights of the next village would appear. That's when I heard it. A whisper. Not from behind me, not from ahead, but right next to my ear. I froze. It wasn't words, at least none I recognized. It was low, raspy, and drawn out, like breath over broken glass. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my throat. I turned sharply, my phone light darting through the mist. Nothing. Only the swirls of fog shifting, as if disturbed by something moving just out of sight. I started walking faster. My footsteps sounded far too loud, each one echoing unnaturally. Then, up ahead in the fog, I saw a flicker of light. Relief flooded me, maybe a house, maybe someone who could help. I ran towards it. But as I got closer, the light wasn't steady. It was swinging, like it was hanging from a hook, a lantern, and beneath it, a figure stood perfectly still in the middle of the road, facing me. It was tall, taller than any man I'd seen, draped in what looked like a long tattered coat that swayed in the breeze I couldn't feel. The lantern hung from one of its hands, though its arm seemed too long, the elbow bending at an unnatural angle. The fog curled around its shape, but no matter how much I strained my eyes, I couldn't make out a face. And then slowly, it raised its other hand. It pointed straight at me. I stayed home from work the next day. Not because I was sick, at least not physically, but because the thought of seeing him again made my chest tighten. I tried to convince myself that I'd imagined it, that maybe the cold air and the late-night shadows had just played tricks on my mind. By the afternoon, I felt a bit foolish. I told myself, you're letting paranoia win. So I decided to take a short walk to the corner shop for some groceries. I had just stepped out my front door when I froze. Sitting across the street, on a bench by the bus stop, was the man. He was in the exact same outfit, the exact same blank expression. And then I noticed something that made my stomach twist. In his hands, resting on his knees, was a small notepad. From where I stood, I could see my own house drawn in pen windows, door, and even the ivy creeping up the wall. He looked up at me. This time he smiled. Story 3. Delivery at midnight. It was a Wednesday night, I was just finishing a late shift working from home. My eyes burned from staring at spreadsheets all day, and I was ready to crawl into bed. The house was quiet, except for the faint hum of my refrigerator in the kitchen. At exactly midnight, my phone buzzed with a notification. Motion detected, front porch. I frowned. I wasn't expecting anyone, especially not at that hour. I live in a quiet suburban street where nothing happens past 9 p.m. I opened the live feed from my doorbell camera. A man in a brown delivery uniform stood at my front door. He wasn't moving, just standing there with his head slightly tilted down. The brim of his cap cast a shadow over his eyes, making them impossible to see. He was holding a medium-sized cardboard box, no labels, no tape, nothing to identify it. I waited for him to ring the bell or knock, but he didn't. Instead, he crouched down slowly, set the box gently on the porch, stood back up, and without a word, turned around and walked away into the darkness. I kept watching until he disappeared from view. My heart was thudding in my ears. I opened the door cautiously and stepped outside. The street was empty. The box was light, far lighter than it should have been for its size. Inside, I set it down on the kitchen table and grabbed a knife to slice the tape. Except, there was no tape. The flaps were just folded in. I opened it. The box was empty. Empty, except for a single folded sheet of paper. I unfolded it and froze. In blocky, heavy handwriting, it read, "I can see you." I must have stood there for a full minute, my mind racing. Was this some kind of prank? A threat? I checked the footage again. The man's movements were slow, deliberate. Not like a prankster trying to get away quickly. The next night, I kept my phone on the nightstand, half expecting another alert. Sure enough, at 12 a.m. on the dot, the notification came. My hand shook as I opened the feed. He was there again. But this time, he didn't walk up to the door. He was standing at the very edge of the camera's night vision, just far enough that the details were blurry. He stood completely still. No box this time, no note, just watching. I stayed awake until the feed showed him turning and walking away after about 3 minutes. By the third night, I decided to call the non-emergency police line. They said they'd send a patrol car to drive through my street around midnight. At midnight, the man showed up again. He was closer this time. Standing on my lawn, maybe 10 feet from the door. As I was watching, I saw the faint glow of headlights approaching. The moment the patrol car came into view, the man turned and walked briskly into the darkness between two houses. The officers searched the area but found nothing, no footprints, no sign of forced entry. They told me it was probably a harmless loiterer and left. I didn't believe that for a second. By now, I wasn't sleeping much. I'd start checking the camera around 11:50 just in case. That night, the alert came early, 11:56 p.m. When I opened the feed, my stomach dropped. He was standing right at the bottom step of my porch. I could finally see his face under the brim of the cap. Except, something was wrong. His expression didn't change, not even when he shifted slightly in the cold breeze. It was like his face was locked in place, too still to be natural. He didn't move for nearly 5 minutes. Then, without turning around, he stepped backwards into the dark, one slow step at a time, until the camera couldn't see him anymore. I was sitting on the couch with my laptop open when the alert came at 12:01 a.m. But this time, it wasn't motion detected. It said, "Camera offline." My breath caught. The camera almost never goes offline, and when it does, it's because someone is tampering with it. I stared at the screen, willing it to reconnect. 30 seconds passed, then a minute, then 2. Finally, the feed flickered back to life. What I saw nearly made me drop my phone. The man was inside my living room, standing less than 6 feet from the camera, which I keep on a bookshelf for a wide-angle view of the room. He wasn't wearing the cap anymore. His hair was thin, and his face looked wrong. Too pale, like wax. His eyes were wide open, staring directly into the lens. And then, He smiled, a slow, deliberate smile. He raised his right hand and waved. The feed cut to black. I don't live in that house anymore. And I never found out how he got in or what would have happened if I'd been asleep. Story 4. The Child with No Face. It was just after 2 a.m. when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. At first, I thought it was a wrong number text, but then I saw the notification. Motion detected front porch. Half asleep, I opened the Doorbell camera app. The image was dark, except for the small figure standing right in front of my door. It was a child. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, wearing a light blue nightgown that looked old and thin, like it had been washed hundreds of times. She was crying. Even with the grainy night vision, I could see her shoulders shaking. But something was off. Her face wasn't clear, not like the camera was glitching, but like there was nothing there for it to focus on. The features were blurred into a smooth, pale oval. My first thought was that she was hurt or lost, so I turned on the porch light and went to the door. Through the wood, I heard a small, trembling voice. I can't find my mommy. Something in my gut twisted. Instead of opening the door, I called the police. They said they'd send a car immediately. But by the time the officers arrived, barely 5 minutes later, the porch was empty. When I pulled up the recording from the camera, I felt my skin crawl. The girl's face wasn't just blurry, it was like the camera refused to capture it at all. Every frame where her head turned toward the lens looked smudged, like the pixels were melting. The rest of the footage was perfectly clear, her hair moving in the breeze, the tears on her cheeks catching the porch light, the hem of her nightgown brushing her knees. But her face, nothing. The next night, I left my phone on loud just in case. And sure enough, around the same time, the notification came. Motion detected, front porch. It was her again. Only this time, she wasn't crying. She was just standing there, head tilted slightly, facing the camera. Her voice was different now when she spoke, deeper, slower. "Can I come in?" I didn't move. Didn't speak. She just stood there for nearly 2 minutes, and then walked backwards into the darkness. By the third night, I was getting paranoid. I kept all the lights on and barely moved from the couch. The notification came at 1:58 and she was back, closer this time. Right at the door, her hands pressed against it. And her voice. It wasn't a child's anymore. It was low, gravelly, almost like multiple voices speaking in unison. "Please, let me in, I'm so cold." When I looked closely at the feed, I saw that her body was trembling. But it wasn't from the cold. It was like her limbs were twitching, just barely in short jerks. I didn't call the police this time. I just watched until she left. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat in the dark, watching the live feed. When the notification came at 2:03 am, I already had the app open. She was standing at the bottom of the steps now, head tilted back to look straight into the camera. And then, her face started to change. The blur was fading, replaced by pale skin, a nose, lips, eyes. My heart nearly stopped when I realized the face forming wasn't hers at all. It was mine, the exact shape of my jaw, the exact line of my eyebrows. My own eyes staring back at me, but wrong. Somehow, too wide, too still. She smiled with my smile. And in my voice, not the child's voice, not the deep distorted one, but my exact voice, she said, "Let me in." The feed went black for a second. When it came back, the porch was empty. I moved out a week later. The new place doesn't have a doorbell camera. And sometimes, I wonder if that's a mistake.